I analyze hundreds of dynamic poses from real-life references to some of the wildest manga panels drawn by top Japanese artists to answer this one question: what do these mangakas know about posing that I don't? For my studies, I narrowed it down to 3 key principles of dynamic posing that you can start using right now in your own drawings, plus some bonus tips at the end on foreshortening and picking camera angles. Let's go. Quick thanks for today's sponsor, Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform for creatives and entrepreneurs. Before we start, obviously spoilers alert, because I'll be heavily using manga panels as my source materials, so you have been warned. To know how to draw good poses, we first need to understand the ingredients of a good pose. After staring at my massive PureF board for exactly 3 minutes and 21 seconds, the first thing that came to my mind is silhouette. Look at these 3 examples from Haikyu, Kagurabachi, and Dan. The long swooping line of action here on one side of the figure and an uneven side of the silhouette. Almost all of the dynamic high-octane action poses you see here share this trait. I'll go deeper into why later on, but let's look at it from another angle. If I put 20 of these poses side by side, the immediate thing that jumps out at me is almost all of these can be simplified into triangles. Triangles here, triangles there. There are different shapes that you can use, for example, the square in this one from Kagurabachi and these from Slam Dunk. But when compared to the triangle poses, these don't feel as badass. Square is a more stable shape, so it doesn't really topple over, but triangles often give off this feeling of instability and dynamism. There's an exception though, that is triangles like this, where the base is sitting on the ground, can also convey stability. They're kind of like the kit between these triangles and square poses. Applying the same thing to a square, the diamond shape feels unstable because it's standing on its pointy end, but balanced because the sides are equal. And really using these 4 shapes, you pretty much have access to almost all of the cool poses here. And I know you guys are thinking, but how do I apply this to my own drawings? Exactly, I got you. Here's what I did to modify this reference to a more dynamic pose using just a silhouette tip. Looking at the original pose, there's a clear square shape, but some parts of the body doesn't really fit into the shape as cleanly, so I twisted the angle of the left leg just slightly to get that better fit. The pose now becomes more tight and loses this negative shape between the legs. It's not bad, but I don't know if it's better than the original pose. So I then moved on to this triangle pose. Here I tried to switch to a lower angle to emphasize that triangle more, like we're looking up at the punch, where the perspective lines almost points to his head here. I think this one is slightly more successful, where the shape helped to make the pose more dynamic. Speaking of negative shapes, just like in this pose, you want to pay attention to the angle between things and negative shapes as well. Noticing a difference here will often help you get out of tunnel vision and figure out mistakes like limb positioning. We will talk about how to create rhythm and balance in your poses next, but let me take a minute here to tell you more about Squarespace. Look no further, because Squarespace is the perfect website builder for you to showcase your work in the most aesthetic way possible. They have tons of these sick templates, and the way you design these are so intuitive, even this guy here can easily do it. If you're someone who's taking commissions, then not only does Squarespace provide built-in payment tools that allows you to sell prints and digital products, but they also have advanced scheduling tools to make it super easy to manage your clients. You can also register for a super cool custom domain like this to make your website feel authentic and give it some personality. They give a 14-day free trial as well, so once you have your site ready, head to my link in the description below and use code RICEBRUSH to save 10% off your first purchase. Thank you Squarespace again for supporting the channel. In the book Force by Michael Motesi, he talked about a very interesting concept about how to see applied force and directional force in a pose. I don't exactly understand what he's talking about with the forces, but from what I can gather, both of these forces represent the action line or movement of the figure. How I interpreted it is the flow of the body, and this has to do with how each major parts of the body twists and turns to create a rhythmic sense of the pose. For example, in this shot of Haikyu where Hinata is jumping, preparing to slap the living crap out of the ball, you can see how the entire body cocks back like bow and arrow. If I understand it correctly, the directional force would be this curve right here, and the applied force would be the pullback action into this direction. By paying attention to these forces, you can exaggerate poses and make them more more fluid and dynamic, just like this other example from Dan Da Dan where the character is preparing for a love tap. There are some extra info about force forms. It's pretty much just a reiteration of the previous concept where a form is leading the body to produce a pose or movement. In that same pose, the action was driven by the shoulder form, this knee, and the hips here. Now, how would I transform a pose from a reference into a more forceful pose? Basically, the way I would try to think about it is imagining a string pulling on one point or multiple points of the body. For demonstration purposes, I'm just gonna make it one point because it's easier to understand. This standing pose look really bland from the side because she's standing straight. But if we imagine a line attached to her hip like this and the string is being pulled to this direction, suddenly the whole pose changes. You can kind of simulate this using the 3D models in Clip Studio Paint. Just grab a point of the model and drag it. It's not perfect because this looks kind of jank, but it's a good practice just to learn how it feels. Next up, this is probably the most overlooked thing by artists when it comes to dynamic poses, and the secret here is the center of mass. This is obviously very important to think about for static poses, but even in poses like these where you would think, balance? What balance? It's still a key factor in making your poses look successful. Back to the book Force again, this diagram shows us how the human body adapts into positions to achieve balance when performing a movement or pose. For example, in this panel of One Punch Man where Sonic is being shy from Genos' advances here, the reason why this pose looks dynamic and natural is because of the hands being thrown here to the front of the body to attempt to balance the center of mass being pushed backwards. Same goes with the left leg here. But keep in mind that this is not a stable pose. It's an unstable pose drawn deliberately for the story's needs. And this is where learning about this is so important. So you have control over what you're choosing to express through posing. In this pose, the weight of the body is being supported on both legs on this point of the toes, so the gravity line goes through like this. The pose would be off balance if I drew her hips a bit more backwards like this, so the hips must shoot over the line in order to keep the body in balance, if that makes sense. Going back to some more dynamic poses in mangas, this pose of Haikyu receiving the ball is a very well balanced pose because the widespread points of contact the pose have with the ground, creating this stable triangle that we talked about. The outstretched arms are balanced by the hips that shoots backwards like this. And really you see this everywhere in all of the poses where the body has to compensate for balance during a movement. But so far we have only been drawing these dynamic poses from a relatively boring straight on angle. The next step would be to enhance this and put the poses in a dynamic camera angle as well. So let's see how we can do that. Choosing camera angles is not as complicated as you think because we have technology. I'll talk about other methods as well, so bear with me. Let me show you how these gadgets work. To visualize poses from another angle, the most straightforward way is to use tools like 3D to help us see the pose before we even put them down on paper. But the problem with these 3D models is they are hard to operate and can be very stiff sometimes. Using the 3 tips that we talked about earlier, you should be able to find a number of angles that give you that dynamic look while at the same time exaggerating the pose so it looks more alive. If you don't really want to use 3D, then mastering how to position the torso and hips will be your highest priority. Drawing these fast and dynamic C curves and S curves on top of the form is going to help you find your limb placements. In terms of storytelling, just switching between these camera angles can have a lot of impact on your scenes. The hero shot, the establishing shot, and the neutral shot are just placements of the camera relative to the horizon line in your scenes. Almost every cool climax panel where the main character does something impactful involves the hero shot. This is just a camera angle that captures the character from a slightly lowered angle like this. And the cool thing about this angle is it's very easy to create that stable triangle shape that we were talking about earlier. Because the perspective lines converge towards the top when the angle is lowered, you usually get that stable triangle shape naturally in these poses, giving off a powerful frame to the character. Depending on the pose, you can use the angle to your advantage and to control the level of foreshortening in the scene. In these panels, the author is trying to show the combat action mainly happening at the upper body, so it makes sense to put the camera looking down to the characters like this. But if you're trying to max out on dynamism, the panels from Kagurabachi here offers some really unique camera placements. A lot of these feels like the camera is following the characters around like in movie sets, giving these insane aerial shots of the characters fighting. These are just some ideas for you to pay attention to the next time you pick up your pencil, but when we talk about posing, then we definitely cannot miss out on anatomy. Did you know that you're secretly making these 7 deadly mistakes about anatomy when you're drawing? Click here to find out more. Subscribe.